Welcome back. At this point, you've got some great foundational knowledge of what UX is, and you've chosen your first portfolio project. But before you dive into your first project, we're going to introduce the peer review portion of this certificate. Iterating on a design using feedback is an integral part of effective UX design. As you start this second course, you'll find a new type of assessment, peer reviews. Peer reviews are assignments that enable learners to provide feedback on each other's assignment submissions. In this certificate, peer reviews are much more than just graded assignments. This practice of providing and receiving feedback is an important skill that you'll need in your work as a UX designer. In peer review assignments, you will submit your document for review from your peers. Next, you'll review the work of your peers using a rubric and the comment section. The peer reviews you will be working on are your first step to be part of a design team. This is where you will practice giving and receiving feedback like a UX designer. You've already learned that effective UX begins with collaboration and research. The best way to think of the peer review process is as practice for future collaboration with members of your UX team in the workplace. Peer reviews can be intimidating, but the first thing you should know is that you're already kind of a pro. You've been interacting with UX your whole life. From watching the flow of traffic, to organizing your closet, to navigating this very website, you've been an engaged user. This certificate will help you create and comprehend the user interactions you're most likely familiar with, while giving you the words to describe their effectiveness. As you think about giving and receiving peer feedback, keep in mind that future employers will be interested in seeing how you receive feedback and implement that feedback into your designs. Here's how you can leverage what you know in our learning to be an effective peer reviewer. Understand the activity. This should always be your first step. You have to understand the concept of the activity before you can explain how a peer's work can be improved. It's a recommended best practice to complete the activity before you move on to reviewing the work of others. Provide descriptive feedback. Peer review in UX design primarily focuses on describing issues that need to be improved in the design. The best way that you can provide feedback in peer reviews is to think of what you've learned about UX and best design practices, and use that to describe what you see or experience. Sharing your unique perspectives without telling your peers how to specifically improve their designs may spark some creativity within the designer whose work you're critiquing. Leverage that. Pick 2 or 3 things you liked about their work. Specifically, this is where you speak to why the design does a good job of completing the assignment. Giving positive feedback before critical feedback provides encouragement and support. Pick 2 or 3 things that can be improved and provide actionable advice. In particular, find the areas that you think can be improved and think about how they can be changed. Then, explain why you think that change is important for your fellow learner to consider. Refer back to a video or reading from the week if necessary. Be respectful and kind. Peer reviews work best when feedback is honest and the tone is respectful. Try using phrases like, "I have a couple of thoughts to share," or "I like what you've done here. Have you considered?" Or, "When I completed the assignment, I found it helpful to." Using definitive phrases like "you need to" or "this is wrong" may make your fellow learners feel attacked. Now that you understand how to reply to your peers, let's look at an example. Here is what a peer review for this certificate looks like. On the left, you have the prompt and a link to the peer's work to review. On the right, there's an area where you award points based on the assignment rubric. The rubrics change and adjust based on the criteria of each assignment. This peer review is based on a fictional assignment to pick an idea for your first project app. This peer's assignment says that their project idea is to design a loading screen for a flea market. In reviewing this idea, the learner has a specific idea in mind, so on the rubric, we'll give them 2 points. But it's missing the second component. the idea must work as a mobile app, so we'll award them no points for that section. Now that you've evaluated the assignment, you can add a comment at the bottom of the page. In this area, you could respond with, "Hi, this is a great start. The prompt you've picked is really engaging. It has a clear problem to solve and a user for the product. I noticed you did not mention a device for this product. Have you considered a device?" It might be a good idea to take a look back at the Project 1 reading and consider the device requirements. And once you're ready, you can hit Submit Review. And that's it. While you're reviewing other work, you should be receiving feedback on your own assignment. Here are a few things that you should keep in mind as you read the feedback from your peers. Stay open-minded. The feedback from your peers is coming from a place that is different from yours, and that's great. When looking at their feedback, it's important that you really think about where that feedback is coming from and how it can improve the user's experience with your product. Remember your goal. Take some time to look at the feedback you've been provided and look at how it applies to your users' goals. Would it help get them closer to what you're envisioning? If so, think about applying the feedback. If not, think about why it wouldn't be effective and document that for use later. Keep your own agency. Remember that you are the lead designer on this project. If you disagree with feedback, that's okay. As you continue to work in the design field, you'll realize that everyone can have different opinions about creative work. What's important is that you, as the lead designer for your project, can look at the work you're creating and know that it meets your users' goals as efficiently as possible. Being able to effectively provide and receive feedback from other UX designers makes you a better designer and prepares you for a career full of ideation and iteration. Keep in mind, this is a new endeavor. You're all here to learn and become better designers. Good luck as you move forward. Hi again. We're ready to dig into one of the most important parts of the UX design process, empathizing with our users. In this video, we'll learn what empathy is and how it's applied in UX design. We'll also discuss the importance of understanding user needs, behaviors, and motivations. The best thing designers can do to create good user experiences is empathize. Empathy is the ability to understand someone else's feelings or thoughts in a situation. Empathizing with potential users is important to every step of the design thinking process. First, let's explore what we really mean by empathy. Sure, you have a definition, but when you think about empathy in relation to similar words like pity and sympathy, the meaning can get a little blurry. So let's break it down. When you have pity for someone, you feel sorry for them. But pity usually has condescending overtones. Think about it like this. Pitiful and pathetic are synonyms. When you have sympathy for someone, you acknowledge their feelings, but you keep yourself from experiencing those feelings. Empathy goes beyond sympathy. When you empathize with someone, you share their mental and emotional experiences. Empathy is at the core of everything we do. Approaching UX research with empathy makes it easier for you to solve the right problem. Like anyone else, UX designers make a lot of assumptions, but UX design is not about solving problems we assume users want solved. It's about solving problems that users actually want solved. When we first meet someone, we may have a lot of assumptions about who they are. As we get to know them, though, we may discover that our assumptions were not so accurate. This is true in UX design, too. We might think we know who a user is and what they need, but UX research reveals who they really are and what they actually need, allowing us to better empathize with the user. Hey there! At this point, you should have a firm understanding of what it means to empathize with users. To really understand how users think and feel, you need to talk to them directly. One way you can learn from real people about their needs is by conducting interviews. But how can you find and recruit people to interview? In the next few videos, we'll go over what you need to do to recruit participants, prepare for interviews, and conduct interviews. Are you ready? Let's get started with how to recruit participants first. As you can probably imagine, recruiting participants who are available to be interviewed takes time and planning. When you're on the job in the real world, you might start with a screener survey to help identify the best candidates to interview for your research study. A screener survey, or simply screener for short, is a detailed list of questions that helps researchers determine if potential participants meet the requirements of the research study. For the purposes of this course, you aren't required to create a screener, but it is a good tool to be familiar with for the future. Whether you use a screener survey or just move straight to recruiting, you should start with one important step. Determine the interview goals. To determine the goals of the interview, ask yourself questions like the following. What do you want to learn from the interviews? Are there certain user problems or pain points that you need to empathize with? Are there any characteristics of users you want to interview? Why? And how much information should we have to ensure we get a comprehensive and balanced set of data? Write a clear list of goals to explain why you are conducting interviews, which will help determine the characteristics of participants who will be ideal for you to meet with. For example, imagine you're designing a weather app for the project in this course. The goal of your interviews during the empathize phase could be to understand emotions that people experience related to unpredictable weather. Or imagine you're designing a shopping app. During interviews, you may want to identify common user behaviors and experiences involved in shopping online, like adding and removing items from a cart. As you start recruiting, aim to form a representative sample. A representative sample is a subset of the target population that seeks to accurately reflect the characteristics of the larger group. The participants in a representative sample should include user groups that have been commonly underrepresented in previous research. This lack of representation is often the result of biases due to age, race, gender, or ability. Having a diverse pool of participants to choose from will help you create great experiences for all users. Once you've determined the goals of your interviews, it's time to continue the recruitment process. To do this, we'll explore how to search for potential interview participants. In the real world, there are lots of factors that determine how and where UXers find potential interview participants. For example, finding people to interview can depend on the company you work for, the type of product you're designing, time constraints for the project's budgets, and the accessibility of the people you want to interview. For the purpose of this course, you may be limited on who you can find to be part of your study. So all of the methods we're going to discuss may not be an option for you at the moment. That's okay. To begin your search, start by creating a list of who you know personally. You can also ask people from your professional circles, such as your current or former colleagues, managers, or even peers in this course. Once you've compiled a list of people you know, move on to people you don't know. Perhaps the easiest way to recruit interview participants outside of your immediate network is through social networks or online platforms. We already mentioned finding people to interview through your social media profiles. You can also connect with potential interviewees via professional networking sites like LinkedIn. Online groups based on personal interests are another great resource. For example, if you're designing an app for musicians, you might find an online group about creating music through a Google search or on social media sites like Facebook or Reddit. Okay, so you have quite a few ideas for how to find people to interview for your project in this course. I also want to share a couple of ways that you might find interview participants in the real world on the job. Keep in mind, though, that these two methods are not expected for the purposes of this course. One method you might use is a third-party research recruiting agency. This means that the agency you hire finds people for you to interview. Recruiting agencies are useful because they save you time and can often reach a greater diversity of users than you might be capable of reaching on your own. However, please note, for this course, you are not expected to hire a third-party recruiting agency. Hiring a recruiting agency costs money, so you will likely only use this method if you're working on a project that has a budget for this service. You and your team may also choose to connect with research participants through paid services like usertesting.com or userinterviews.com. All right, hopefully you now have a decently sized list of people you can ask to participate in your interviews. You may decide to reach out to these participants based on who's available. Or if you were sending a screener survey, you might select the candidates who align best with your interview goals. Either way, it's likely that a few candidates will stand out quickly as ideal candidates. When you are ready, reach out to each prospective participant. The most common way to do this is via email. Let's explore what you should include. Start with a greeting that introduces yourself and the project. Then, briefly explain why you are reaching out to them. Include logistics for the interview, like location, date, and time. Next, explain the setup for the interview. This is a good time to explain any parts of the interview that you'll need their consent for, like recording audio or video. Begin wrapping up your email by letting the participant know how they should confirm their interview time if they are interested. This can either be through a link to schedule their interview or through an email reply. If you have the budget, add an incentive like a gift card. This always helps sweeten the deal and makes participants excited to interview. Finally, close the email with a salutation and your name. After you confirm people to interview, it's a good idea to send email reminders the week before the interview and the night before the interview. This will help ensure that the people you found actually show up for their interview. And that's a wrap. Finding great interview participants takes true effort, but the great research you'll conduct will make it all worth it. In the next video, you'll learn all about preparing for interviews. Good luck! go again. We've just covered how to secure participants for your interviews. Now, you need to prepare to actually conduct those interviews. In this video, we'll go over what needs to happen so you're fully prepared to ace each interview. Have you ever heard the quote, "Before anything else, preparation is the key to success"? I'm positive that when inventor Alexander Graham Bell said those words in the 19th century, he didn't have UX design in mind. However, this is great advice when approaching a user interview. Whether you're conducting interviews in person or online, preparing ahead of time helps you make the most of your limited time together and learn as much as possible about the interviewee's unique perspectives. There are many ways to prepare for your interview. First, script the interview questions. It's considered a best practice to keep interview questions consistent for every user, so this list of questions will be your guide during the interview. Second, collect supplies you'll need for the interview, such as a printed list of your questions, a computer, or paper and a pencil, and any recording equipment you might need. If you're using new equipment or technology during the interview, make sure you know how it works in advance. For example, if you're conducting an interview online, you'll want to make sure you're familiar with the platform you'll be using and check that the interviewee has access to the technology before your interview begins. A good UX designer also comes prepared with a backup plan in case problems with technology occur. This could be as simple as making sure you have a phone number to contact the participant. Third, research the users. If the users you are preparing to interview provide their personal information before the interview, be sure to take note of it. This information might include their name, demographic information, relevant user experience with the product you're designing, or details about how they found out about the interview. You can also review their answers to a screener survey if you administered one before the interview. And lastly, practice. It's always a good idea to practice delivering the questions you'll ask users before you conduct a real interview. Doing so will help you ensure that the interview runs smoothly later on. Once you've done all of these steps, you're finally ready to meet with your interview participants. I'll meet you in the next video, where we'll go over the steps and best practices for conducting your interviews. See you there. Welcome back. Now that your participants are scheduled and you've prepared your interview materials, you're finally ready to conduct those interviews. In this video, we'll review the 4 steps to conducting user interviews. As I mentioned before, conducting interviews with real people is a great way to learn more about users' needs. Like many other UX designers, I find this part of the design process extremely exciting. For me, interacting with users to identify pain points is like connecting puzzle pieces. By the end of my interviews, what started off as standalone pain points comes together to create a better understanding of what needs to happen to improve the product. Okay, let's get started. The first step is to meet the participant. Let's face it, meeting strangers can sometimes be awkward. You may not know what to expect or you don't know what to say. Your job as a UX professional is to make your participants feel relaxed and at ease. Here are some tips on how to do this. Build a good rapport. This is all about establishing a professional but friendly interaction. You can use light conversation to start, something like, "How's your day going?" You should also thank the participant for coming. Thanking users is a part of establishing a good rapport and can make them feel like their opinions and time are valued. Take time to review legal details that your interviewees need to know before the interview starts. This can be a good time to present any legal documents that require their consent to release audio recordings. You could also have your participants sign a verification that they are above the age of 18 and don't need permission from a parent or guardian. Gather basic details as you meet users. Remember to ask about any details that are relevant to the interview, like their name and demographic information. Starting with questions that are easy for the participant to answer can give them a nice boost in confidence. And finally, let the participant know that there are no right or wrong answers. This way, they feel comfortable and are not worried about giving incorrect answers. Now you're ready for the second step of the interview process, conducting the interview. Here are a couple of things to keep in mind as you conduct interviews. Follow interview etiquette. Speak in a clear and concise manner while asking questions. It's important to remain professional no matter how users answer a question. While interviewing, also remember to ask open-ended questions. Asking yes or no questions doesn't allow your participant to tell their honest thoughts on your product. Instead, try asking questions that start with why or what. For example, if you ask a question like, "Do you like online shopping?" you'll likely get one of two responses, yes or no. Instead, ask an open-ended question like, "What do you like and dislike about online shopping?" Asking questions in this manner will give you a more in-depth understanding of the user's feelings, like their likes and dislikes. You should also ask follow-up questions based on how the participant answers the initial question. As you are conducting interviews, remember to take notes, which is the third step of conducting a user interview. Have you ever had a great conversation with a friend only to struggle to remember the specifics of the conversation later on? Maybe you remember how the conversation started and ended, but everything in the middle is a blur. This happens to all of us, and user interviews are no different. That's why it's helpful to take notes during the interview. In the UX world, researchers who work for companies or on teams often have other members moderate or take notes during the session. For now, you'll have to fill both of these roles on your own. While taking notes, you'll want to highlight compelling quotes. These interesting quotes are great indicators about how users really think and feel. They can be included in empathy maps and user testimonies later on. Document observations about participants. Sometimes what a participant does is equally important as what they say. Making notes on their mood, expressions, body language, and behaviors will be important to consider when creating empathy maps. Finally, consider recording interviews. When you're first learning how to conduct research, recording is ideal. It can be helpful later when you're revisiting parts of an interview or taking additional notes after the interview is over. Again, it's best practice to always ask your participants for their permission to record them before the interview begins. The fourth and final step to conducting a user interview is to wrap up the interview. Just like in a track race, when you're nearing the finish line of an interview, it's important to end just as strongly as when you started. Wrapping up an interview without showing gratitude to participants for joining the interview can leave them feeling uncomfortable or wishing they had not agreed to participate. Instead, you want them to leave feeling like their opinions were a valuable contribution to your overall design process. To do this, wrap up the interview by giving users a chance to share final thoughts about any items discussed during the interview. Some participants might open up about their opinions and reveal insights that they didn't share earlier. You might try asking them if there are any new points they want to add. Also, you should always thank the participant again for their time. Tell them that you appreciate them participating in your interview and give them a warm goodbye. If you offered any incentives to your participants to interview, now is the time to share them. Okay, that's a wrap. I hope learning these steps helps approaching an interview feel less intimidating. Following each of these steps in order increases the likelihood that your interview will run smoothly. In the next video, you'll move on to creating an empathy map. Meet you there.
someone took
Hi, and welcome back. How did your user interviews go? I'm sure you're already starting to understand your users better. As we continue through this stage of the design process, one way that we can visualize empathy is by creating an empathy map. An empathy map is an easily understood chart that explains everything designers have learned about a type of user. An empathy map consists of 4 squares, which show what the user says, does, thinks, and feels. The word user goes in the middle, right where these squares intersect. Now you're ready to fill in the squares. Keep in mind there are 2 types of empathy maps. One user empathy maps, where you record feedback from a single user, and aggregated empathy maps, where you consolidate feedback from a group of users. Let's start by creating a one-user empathy map, and then we'll move on to an aggregated empathy map. Imagine you're on a team building an app that promises food delivery in 30 minutes or less. You interview users about their experiences with food delivery. The top left of your empathy map includes what the user says during the interview. When you do this, use direct quotes if you can. For example, one user, Simone, has ordered food through other delivery apps before. Simone might say something like, "I wish food delivery apps provided more accurate time estimates." We should write this direct quote from Simone in the says square of our empathy map. Next, the bottom left square focuses on what the user does. These could be actions or behaviors the user shares in their responses, or even the user's physical actions during the interview. For example, Simone might share how they only order delivery when eating at home alone. The top right square focuses on what the user thinks. This includes things the user doesn't actually say, but that you can tell through observation. Facial expressions are a great way to understand what a user is thinking. A furrowed brow might indicate that Simone is skeptical about a 30 minutes or less guarantee. Finally, the bottom right square of the empathy map focuses on what the user feels. You could directly ask Simone what they're feeling during the interview, so long as it's done in an open-ended way. For example, you might ask, "How do you feel when you try to place delivery orders through an app?" After the interview, fill in the feels square with these observations. And we're done with Simone's empathy map. Nice work! Next, you'll learn how to build aggregated empathy maps. Now that you know how to build one user empathy maps, it's time to take what you've learned about a single user and apply that to multiple users. Aggregated empathy maps represent a visualization of everything designers know about an entire user segment or group of similar users, not just one user. Aggregated empathy maps appear exactly like one user empathy maps, breaking down the information we've learned about our user segment into 4 categories: says, does, thinks, and feels. The difference is that aggregated empathy maps include information that is gathered from multiple users. Continuing with our example, let's say that the day you interviewed Simone, you also interviewed Miranda and Louis. In the says square, Miranda mentioned something similar to what Simone said about accurate estimates, but Louis says, "I wish I could live track my food delivery." We'll add that response below Simone's response in the says square. For does, something that both Miranda and Louis shared was that they order delivery on weeknights more often than weekends. So we'll add that to the does square. Now we're on the thinks square. During the interview, Louis shares that it would be nice if their favorite restaurants had a delivery option. Let's add this to the thinks square. Next, Simone responded to the question, "How do you feel when you try to place a delivery order through an app?" by expressing frustration with the lack of direction in most food delivery apps. We'll add this reply to the feels square first. Louis stated feeling annoyed with trying to navigate delivery apps. We'll add that feedback last. And now we have a complete aggregated empathy map that represents a full user segment. Creating an aggregated empathy map can seem overwhelming, but keep in mind that you want it to represent an entire user segment that you've interviewed. As you think about the ways to group your user feedback, remember that each map should reflect a different user segment with specific thoughts and needs. For example, if you find yourself interviewing a few users who find the app easy to use and have no real issues or complaints, that user segment would be represented by a different aggregated empathy map than the users who were frustrated when they tried to use the app. Ready to start thinking about creating empathy maps for your project? In the upcoming activity, you'll review the interviews you've conducted and begin creating your own empathy maps from real user feedback. Good luck! Welcome back. Earlier, you learned why empathizing is so important. As a UX designer, empathizing is your #1 superpower because it helps you spot user problems. Solving user problems is the ultimate goal of UX design. But how do you even know if a problem is really a problem? Let's jump right in. Think about New Year's resolutions. Most of us set goals at the beginning of the year, but how many of us keep those goals? Well, it turns out not many. 80% of New Year's resolutions fail because they are not clear or we set unrealistic expectations. UX designers face similar challenges when setting goals. To make sure you're tackling something you can impact, set clear and actionable goals by focusing on user problems. So, let's identify those user problems. By now, one thing should be pretty clear. UX design is all about the user. You're always designing for the user. But who is the user, and what are their struggles? To find out, you need to be a bit of a mind reader. Okay, you don't exactly have to read minds, but you do need to use your superpower, your ability to empathize. You need to do research to get into the user's head and understand where they're coming from. You also have to anticipate both the needs that users know they have and the needs they don't know they have. That's weird, right? How do users not know what they need? Well, here's an example. In the heyday of flip phones, customers might have thought they needed a longer battery life, a bigger interface, an easier way to text. But they had no idea they needed smartphones. Most of us didn't even know smartphones were possible. So when Apple introduced the first modernized smartphone in 2007, we were dazzled by all it could do. Having a smartphone quickly turned into a need for so many of us. So if you narrow down everything that a UX designer does into a single role, that role would be problem solver. And solving user struggles or pain points is number one on the list. Pain points are any UX issues that frustrate the user and block the user from getting what they need. Remember the Norman door? If you expect a door to open, it should open. If it doesn't, that's a user pain point. Or how about this one? Ever gone on a company's website to find their customer service info? You click tab after tab, scroll page after page, and you still can't find it? That's a user pain point. Most pain points fall into one of four categories. Financial pain points are user problems related to, you guessed it, money. If you've ever gotten lost in an online article only to be rudely interrupted by a paywall, you know all about these. There are also product pain points. These are usually quality issues related to the product. Norman doors fall into this category. Next up, there are process pain points. These are frustrations that stop the user going from point A to point B. For example, have you ever shopped online and struggled to get the item you want to check out? That's a process pain point, and that could mean the business loses a customer. And finally, there are support pain points. When users interact with your product, they might have questions. If they can't find answers to their questions, they won't feel supported. Customer service information that's hidden on a website falls into this category. Remember when I said designers need to read minds? Well, we also need to read hearts. I think it's safe to say that we've all experienced these kinds of pain points. We know how it feels. As a designer, you need to know how it feels for your user. In other words, you need to have empathy for your user. Think back to the door experiment. Opening the door may not always be easy. What if our user is in a wheelchair? What if they can't reach the knob? What if they don't have enough strength? You want to account for all users. Let's think back to an empathy map. Empathy maps show us what the user thinks, says, does, and feels. Empathy maps help us get into the user's mindset, allowing us to identify their pain points. This is just the beginning. We really want to get to know our users, and that's why designers create user personas. Let's find out what personas are all about. there, and welcome back. Now you know all about user pain points. Next, let's explore personas and why UX designers use them. In UX design, personas are fictional users whose goals and characteristics represent the needs of a larger group of users. Personas can help us identify patterns of behavior in users. These patterns might point to a common pain point that a group of users experiences. While personas are fictional, we don't make these characters up from scratch. We build them based on research. You've got to do your research if you want a set of personas that truly represent your potential users. As you research, you'll form images in your head about who your users are. These will become your personas. Let's build a persona together. First, we'll need to figure out what user group our persona represents. Imagine you're designing a fundraising app that connects nonprofits with volunteers. You do some secondary research and conduct phone interviews with a diverse set of users. Let's say during research, you discover that single professionals in rural areas donate to environmental causes twice as often as single professionals in big cities. You also discover that big city singles are more likely to volunteer than single professionals in rural areas. Based on this, one of your user groups might be owners of environmental nonprofits in rural areas. A user group is a set of people who have similar interests, goals, or concerns. Now that we've identified a solid user group, let's build a persona to represent it. Ready? Meet Seering Choadan, founder of OurPlanet.org. As we build the persona, we want to include her photo and a short biographical sketch. As cool as Mavis is, you aren't and each persona you create humanizes a user group for your team. Seering represents only one persona. You want to build a persona to represent each key user group, and that will take time. Is it worth it to build so many personas? The short answer? Absolutely. Now for the longer answer. Personas build empathy and put a face to the user. They help humanize our users. They give stakeholders a clearer idea of who their users really are and makes the user experience more meaningful. Let's do a little test. When I say to you, there are about 533,000 people over the age of 100 living in the world today, you'll probably find it mildly interesting for a second before promptly forgetting the number. But if I tell you about Mavis Hunter, a competitive runner who only picked up the sport 2 years ago after turning 100 years old, chances are she makes a longer lasting impression. Why? She makes you feel something the stats can't. She feels like a real person. You want to help her continue to do what she loves. That's the power of personas. In addition, personas tell stories. This is why personas are key to turning an average stakeholder presentation into a storytelling experience. If your client is building a new running app, Mavis helps make the case for creating new features or expanding accessibilities for senior citizen athletes. Okay, so personas build empathy and tell stories. But why do you need a whole set of personas? Well, one persona isn't enough to tell all the sides of a design story. As cool as Mavis is, you aren't improving the running app just for her. This is why you need a set of personas. All user groups should be vividly represented. This shows stakeholders the diversity of their user groups, and it lets you test features against them. This leads us to the third reason for why personas are worth it. Personas stress test designs. Let's go back to the running app. What works for Mavis might not work for Diane, a working mother of 3 children under the age of 5. What matters most to Mavis isn't the same as what matters most to Diane. Mavis wants accessibility, while our working mom wants time. Personas make sure we designers create something that benefits a wide range of users. Now that you know what a persona is, what personas do for UX designers, and how to build a persona, let's get to know how personas help us tell a user story. again. You've just finished learning about some great tools for empathizing with users and understanding their pain points. We discussed how to recruit participants for interviews and how to conduct interviews in a way that helps build the strongest insights into the user experience. Of course, we'll cover even. Meet you there.
Annenberg Media.
These people speak French. In this course, everybody speaks French.
Commençons par mes parents.
Don't be concerned if you can't understand what they say at first.
Voilà mon père et ma mère.
Listen, watch, and get involved. Pretty soon you will figure out what's going on and be able to say a few things in French yourself. Marie-Laure has sent her sister on a wild goose chase. When Mireille returns, Robert tries to persuade her to join him in calling on Madame Courtois. It's just his luck that Mireille has already planned a trip to Chartres. Ever resourceful, Robert has a brainstorm. Could he join her?
Le jardin du Luxembourg à Paris, par une belle journée de printemps. Il y a des fleurs, des petits oiseaux, il fait beau. Il n'y a pas un nuage. Si, il y a quelques nuages. Un jeune homme brun, assez grand, sympathique, oui, il est plutôt sympathique, non? Est assis sur un banc. Il parle avec une petite fille qui tient un bateau. Ce jeune homme n'est pas français. Il est en France depuis 2 jours. Au loin, une jeune fille arrive.
Tiens, voilà ma sœur qui revient. Bon, bah moi je m'en vais. Je vais profiter du vent tant qu'il y en a. Ouh, elle n'a pas l'air contente, ma sœur. Quand je lui ai dit que maman lâchait. Ouh, elle n'a pas l'air contente, ma sœur. Quand je lui ai dit que maman la cherchait tout à l'heure, c'était... Pas vrai. C'était une blague. Vous ne lui dites rien, hein? Mystère et boule de gomme.
Merci.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Où est Marie-Laure?
Elle vient de partir par là avec son bateau. Elle m'a dit qu'elle allait profiter du vent tant qu'il y en avait.
Quelle sale gosse, cette gamine. Elle disait que ma mère me cherchait, mais il n'y avait personne à la maison. Encore une de ces blagues stupides. Elle est impossible, cette gamine.
Est-ce que... vous connaissez le Pays Basque?
Bah vous alors, on peut dire que vous avez des questions plutôt inattendues. Pourquoi est-ce que vous me demandez ça? Je vois vraiment pas le rapport. Oui, je le connais un peu. L'été dernier, nous sommes allés à Saint-Jean-de-Luz. Autrefois, quand j'étais petite, nous allions à Belle-Île-en-Mer, en Bretagne. J'aimais bien Belle-Île, c'était tranquille. Il y avait moins de monde. On faisait de la voile, on pêchait des crevettes, on attrapait des crabes. Et quand il pleuvait, on jouait au portrait. On allait voir de vieux films. Mais ma sœur trouvait que c'était pas assez dans le vent. Je veux dire à la mode. Alors l'année dernière, nous sommes allés à Saint-Jean. C'est plus animé. Mais pourquoi est-ce que vous me demandez cela?
J'ai envie d'y aller. Ma mère m'en parlait souvent quand j'étais enfant.
C'est un très beau pays. Et votre mère, elle est là?
Non, pas vraiment. Mais elle y a passé plusieurs années quand elle était enfant. Mon grand-père, le père de ma mère, était juge. Son premier poste a été La Rochelle. C'est pendant que mes grands-parents étaient à La Rochelle que ma mère est née. Puis mon grand-père est passé au tribunal de Bayonne, quand ma mère avait 4 ou 5 ans. Ils sont restés 6 ou 7 ans à Bayonne, je crois. C'est pendant qu'ils étaient à Bayonne que ma mère a rencontré cette Madame Courtois.
En effet, elle est née au Pays Basque. Et ses parents étaient commerçants. Ils avaient un petit magasin de tissus en face de la cathédrale. Et vos grands-parents, où sont-ils maintenant?
Ils sont morts tous les deux. Ils sont morts quand j'avais 9 ou 10 ans. Mais dites-moi, je pensais, je vais aller chez les Courtois demain. Vous n'avez pas envie d'aller les voir demain, par hasard? Puisque Madame Courtois est votre marraine.
Non, demain je ne peux pas. Je dois aller à Chartres.
Voir la cathédrale? Je veux aller la voir aussi un jour.
Non, la cathédrale, je la connais. Je l'ai visitée au moins 5 ou 6 fois avec mes parents et autant de fois avec l'école. Demain, je dois aller voir une exposition dans un petit musée qui se trouve juste à côté.
Est-ce que vous voudriez bien me permettre de...
De m'accompagner? Oh, mais vous pouvez si vous voulez. Mais vous oubliez que demain, vous allez chez les Courtois?
Je peux y aller un autre jour. Après-demain, par exemple.
Mireille! Mireille!
Quoi? Qu'est-ce qu'il y a encore?
Je suis en panne. Mireille!
Quoi? Qu'est-ce qu'il y a encore?
Je suis en panne.
Tu es en panne?
Oui, mon bateau est en panne. Il n'y a plus de vent, il est au milieu du bassin. Il ne revient pas, viens.
Écoute, tu m'embêtes. Débrouille-toi.
Viens.
Non!
Oh, viens.
J'y vais.
Mais qu'est-ce qu'elle est agaçante, cette gamine! Eh, tu te moques de nous? Non, 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 mon bateau est en panne, il est au milieu du bassin. Oh!
Bah oui, il était là tout à l'heure, au milieu du bassin. Le vent est revenu, c'est tout. Oh, c'est tout emmêlé maintenant.
Eh, débrouille-toi!
Ce n'est pas grave. Je vais arranger ça. Et voilà.
Eh bien, dis merci.
Merci.
Vous êtes trop gentil. Mais dites-moi avec tout ça, comment vous appelez-vous?
Robert Taylor. Aucun rapport avec l'acteur. Et vous-même?
Mireille Bello. Aucun rapport avec le poète.
Quelle pédante, cette Mireille. Elle fait allusion à Rémi Bello, un poète du XVIe siècle, un peu oublié. Nous sommes au Luxembourg. Il y a des fleurs. Une fleur, des fleurs. Il y a des oiseaux. Un oiseau, des oiseaux. Il fait beau. C'est un beau jour de printemps. C'est une belle journée de printemps. Un matin, une matinée. Un jour, une journée. Un soir, une soirée. Un an, une année. Marie-Laure parle à Robert. Elle tient un bateau. Ici, elle tient un biscuit dans la main droite. Ici, elle tient un bonbon. Ici, elle tient Fido dans ses bras. Tenir. Nous tenons, vous tenez, ils tiennent, elle tient. Tu tiens, je tiens. C'est comme le verbe venir. Nous venons, vous venez, ils viennent, elle vient, tu viens, je viens. Ou revenir. Nous revenons, vous revenez, ils reviennent, elle revient, tu reviens, je reviens.
Tiens, voilà ma sœur qui revient. Bon, ben moi je m'en vais. Je vais profiter du vent tant qu'il y en a.
Il y a du vent. C'est le vent qui fait marcher les moulins à vent. C'est le vent qui fait marcher les bateaux à voile. Quand il y a du vent, les bateaux marchent. Quand il n'y a pas de vent, les bateaux à voile sont en panne. Ils ne marchent pas, ils n'avancent pas. Il y a du vent. Marie-Laure veut profiter du vent pour jouer avec son bateau. Il n'y a pas toujours du vent. Il faut profiter du vent quand il y en a. Il ne fait pas toujours beau. Il faut profiter du beau temps pour aller au Luxembourg. Mais quand il ne fait pas beau, il faut profiter du mauvais temps pour travailler, pour faire ses devoirs. Enfin, c'est l'opinion de Mireille, mais ce n'est pas celle de Marie-Laure. Écoutez.
Il pleut. Tu devras en profiter pour faire tes devoirs de vacances.
Non, je vais en profiter pour faire la sieste.
Ah, c'est quand même plus calme quand les enfants sont au lycée.
Oui, ben moi, quand ils sont pas là, vous voyez, j'en profite pour travailler un peu.
Le monsieur profite de l'absence de ses enfants pour travailler. Mais Marie-Laure ne veut pas aller travailler. Elle n'a pas envie d'aller travailler. Elle n'a pas envie de travailler, elle a plutôt envie de faire la sieste ou d'aller jouer avec son bateau. Regardez Jean-Claude, il a envie de quelque chose.
Qu'est-ce que tu fais ce soir pour dîner? Tu as envie de dîner?
Eh ben moi, quand ils sont pas là...
Anna et moi?
Mireille ne veut pas aller travailler. Elle n'a pas envie d'aller travailler. Elle n'a pas envie de travailler, elle a plutôt envie de faire la sieste ou d'aller jouer avec son bateau. Regardez Jean-Claude, il a envie de quelque chose.
Qu'est-ce que tu fais ce soir pour dîner? Tu as envie de dîner avec Irina et moi?
Mireille n'est pas contente.
Ouh, elle n'a pas l'air contente, ma sœur.
Mireille n'est pas contente. Regardez Marie-Laure ici. Elle est contente.
Chouette!
Il n'est pas content.
Non mais ça va pas la tête.
Elle n'est pas contente. Maintenant, observez ce couple.
Vous êtes contents qu'on voyage ensemble?
Oui.
Non mais oui, oui, oui.
Mireille n'est pas contente parce que Marie-Laure lui a fait une blague.
Justement, maman te cherchait.
Elle lui a dit que Madame Bello la cherchait. Alors Mireille est allée à la maison. Mais ce n'était pas vrai. Madame Bello n'y était pas. C'était une blague.
Quand je lui ai dit que maman la cherchait tout à l'heure, c'était pas vrai. C'était une blague.
Marie-Laure aime bien faire des blagues. Tenez, regardez.
Regarde, j'ai attrapé un serpent.
Oh mon Dieu, tu es folle! Lâche-la tout de suite!
Oh, mais n'aie pas peur, c'est une blague. Regarde, c'est un faux serpent.
Ce n'est pas un vrai serpent, c'est un faux serpent. Tenez, regardez, ça, c'est un vrai serpent. Mais ça, non, ce n'est pas un vrai serpent, c'est un faux serpent. Attention, maintenant, ça va être un jeu. Si je dis que Mireille est brune, c'est vrai ou faux? C'est faux. Si je dis que Marie-Laure a un bateau, c'est vrai ou faux? C'est vrai. Si je dis qu'il y a des fleurs au Luxembourg, c'est vrai ou faux? C'est vrai. Si je dis qu'il n'y a pas un nuage, c'est vrai ou faux? C'est faux. Et quand Marie-Laure dit à Mireille que sa mère l'a cherchée, c'était faux. Et c'est pour ça que Mireille n'est pas contente et dit que Marie-Laure est une sale gosse, une sale gamine.
Quelle sale gosse cette gamine. Elle me disait que ma mère me cherchait alors qu'il n'y avait personne à la maison. C'est encore une de ces blagues stupides. Elle est vraiment impossible cette gamine.
Robert sourit parce qu'il sait que c'était une blague. Il change le cours de la conversation. Il pose une question inattendue.
Est-ce que vous connaissez le Pays Basque?
En français à l'école, parce qu'elle ne veut pas aller se coucher, sa mère dit qu'elle ne voit pas le rapport.
Va te coucher, ma puce.
Oh, maman, jeudi, c'est mon devoir de français.
C'est très bien. Mais je ne vois pas de rapport. Il n'y a aucun rapport.
Vous connaissez le Pays Basque?
Mireille est étonnée. C'est une question bizarre. Le Pays Basque n'a aucun rapport avec les blagues de Marie-Laure. C'est une question inattendue. Tenez, regardez ici.
Qu'est-ce que tu fais là, toi? T'es pas à l'école?
Mireille est étonnée parce qu'elle n'attendait pas Marie-Laure. L'arrivée de Marie-Laure est inattendue. Voilà une visite inattendue. La dame est étonnée parce qu'elle n'attendait pas cette visite. Ça aussi, c'est inattendu. Attendre, attendu, inattendu. Robert demande à Mireille si elle connaît le Pays Basque.
Est-ce que vous connaissez le Pays Basque?
Est-ce que vous connaissez la cuisine australienne? Vous avez essayé? C'est bon?
La bouffe australienne, vous connaissez?
Non.
Mais regardez, Sonia sait qui est Antoine. Elle le connaît. Sonia et Antoine se connaissent.
Sonia, mon ami Antoine Dutilleul.
Bonsoir.
Bonsoir. Mon ami est...
Je sais fort bien qui est ton ami Antoine. Nous le connaissons déjà, n'est-ce pas?
Oui, oui. Ah bon? Vous connaissez?
Et vous? Vous connaissez le Pays Basque? Vous savez où c'est? Connaître? Vous connaissez le Pays Basque? Savoir?
Vous savez où c'est? Vous ne savez pas où c'est? C'est dans le sud-ouest de la France. C'est en partie en France et en partie en Espagne. C'est un très beau pays. Il y a la montagne et la mer, des maisons basques, des frontons pour jouer à la pelote basque. Il y a des plages, Biarritz, Saint-Jean-de-Luz. En été, il y a beaucoup de monde, beaucoup de touristes. C'est très animé. Mireille trouve que c'est plus animé que la Bretagne. En Bretagne, il y a moins de monde, c'est plus tranquille. Saint-Jean-de-Luz, c'est plus animé. Voilà une rue animée, une rue tranquille. Mais Cécile trouvait que la Bretagne était trop tranquille, pas assez animée, pas assez à la mode, pas assez dans le vent. Ces Bretonnes ne sont pas à la mode, elles ne sont pas dans le vent.
Ces jeunes femmes sont plus dans le vent. Ces jeunes gens sont dans le vent, mais cette jeune fille n'est pas dans le vent.
Celle-ci est dans le vent.
Maman, t'as un mec là!
Ces dames ne sont pas dans le vent.
Ces gens ne sont pas dans le vent.
En Bretagne, c'était des vacances tranquilles. On pêchait les crevettes, on pêchait les crabes. Robert a envie d'aller dans le Pays Basque parce que sa mère en parlait souvent. Le père de sa mère, son grand-père donc, était magistrat. Il était juge dans un tribunal. D'abord, il a été juge au tribunal de La Rochelle, sur Atlantique. Puis, il a été juge au tribunal de Bayonne. Les parents de